First off, let me start with saying that I want to send my best wishes out to Rodrigo Bentancur, who, if you watched this game, which is the 1-0 win for Tottenham Hotspur against Liverpool in the League Cup semi-final first leg, you will have seen, I think it's fair to say, very distressing scenes. Of all the clips we've seen on Twitter over the past 24 hours, they all looked pretty shocking and pretty hard to watch at points. And by all accounts, he's doing relatively as well as he can, considering everything that's happened. And I wish the best for him in any recovery. And hopefully, we see him out on the pitch sometime soon. And he's good and healthy carrying forward. But I just think it's worth saying that because sometimes you'll see things and it puts things into perspective. And it weirdly made the rest of the game a bit of an uncomfortable watch after seeing that. So I just feel like it's right for me to do that. But as always, I will talk about a game. I will analyse a game. And advantage Spurs, a big win for them, especially with the injuries. Liverpool, I don't want to say they've hit a stumbling block because it's 2 games where they've maybe not performed at the level they should be at and the level they've been at. But when you look at the injuries that Spurs have in their defensive line, and to be fair, Liverpool rotated completely in their defensive line, but that was by choice as opposed to Spurs' force. What I think we saw in this game was the desperation that Spurs have to maybe get a trophy over the line. Whereas Liverpool aren't as desperate because they're probably going to win the league. They have a great chance of competing in the Champions League, and obviously FA Cup is still a factor to play in the season. Whereas Spurs are desperate for a trophy. So this is everything to them, I think, this season. And I'm interested to hear from Spurs fans. Would you take a mid-table finish 11th, 12th if it meant you won the League Cup? Because I'm really interested to gauge that thought. Bar Liverpool in this tournament, I feel like the other 3 clubs remaining have a massive amount of pressure on them to get a trophy over the line for their own different reasons. You include Arsenal and Newcastle in that. And with their history in cup finals, they'll all 3 get there and somehow find a way to lose, which would be brilliant. I would still say Liverpool are the favourites. I still expect them to come back to Anfield and win, which I would hope not, because if I had a monkey's paw or a genie's lamp and I had 3 wishes, the first thing would be for Liverpool to lose every game between now and the end of time. And I'm only saying that just because a 1-0 lead is a slender lead in football, and Liverpool have shown that they can turn games on their head in a moment, in an instant. But credit where credit's due, Spurs did fantastically this game, and we'll go over the finer details of that now, starting with Spurs' attacking stage. Spurs would build up as they normally would, and their 2-3-2-3, fullbacks inverting alongside Basuma, and just behind the 2-8s in Kulusevski and Bergvall, Solanke up top, Son on left, Johnson on right, and Liverpool went man for man, kind of. And so Jota would move on to Dragazin as the central striker. Salah would come round into Archie Gray at left centre-back, which presented its own issue, which we'll speak about in a second. Cody Gakpo moved up to Pedro Porro, and that meant it was hard for Spurs to build up through the right-hand side because of the man-marking job being complete on that side of the pitch. There was no real free man for him to build up. And so generally the play was forced over onto the left-hand side. And they all did a really good job. Gakpo's an incredibly disciplined player that drops in and tracks runners really well from his left-wing position. McAllister would push onto Bergvall, Curtis Jones onto Basuma in the pivot, Gravenberch onto Kulusevski. And I know you may be looking at this and think, you silly goose headers, you're leaving Jed Spence free? That's a mistake. No, it wasn't me, you big daft silly. It was Arne Slot, who I think intentionally left Jed Spence free just because he's probably the weaker technical player out of those players in defence for Spurs. And if they could block off those initial lanes into the centre-backs and into the pivot, maybe it was harder for him to receive the ball. And maybe he didn't account for the keeper being in. And Kinski, whose name is very close to sounding like a very naughty word, not really a naughty word at all, actually. I'm being very juvenile. And it's close enough for me to find that hilarious because I'm an immature adult. I am a 6-year-old trapped in a 30-year-old's body. But hey-ho, I can't have everything, can I? I can't have football intelligence and general intelligence. God asked me to pick one. I picked neither. And Gravenberch would push up to Kulusevski, as I just said. And where the danger would come for a Liverpool perspective and where the threat was for Spurs is Jed Spence could pull out a little bit wider as Spurs would try and play around that back 3, suckering those front 3 onto him. Going back to Kinski, who I don't know anything about this player. I've never seen him play before in my life. I couldn't even tell you where he actually came from or what club I mean specifically. But he was excellent. I thought I was so thoroughly impressed with him in his playing out from the back, his composure and in technical quality to pull off difficult passes, to beat that Liverpool press, to gain Spurs a yard, to get them up the pitch and playing their football. I thought was excellent. And so many times he'd just pull off this little chip pass into Spence, even when he was under pressure to do so, where, like, let's say Salah or Jota would jump from their marker to close him down. And he would play that little ball over the top, weighted perfectly for Spence to control, turn in, and start playing forward. And to be fair to Spurs and to be fair to Ange, I feel like he gets a lack of credit for his ability to go direct. And it started happening a lot more in recent weeks. But they aren't just a team that will play through the thirds and try and force it through the middle of the pitch. If they need to, they will go long. And the moment a player gets a little bit of space to turn and play forward, they will look to try and play forward, whether that's to Son on the outside. If Bradley reacts from Son to come up to Jed's bench, which he would do, in that moment where Bradley's reacting, because he's obviously got a long way to travel, so Spence has time to take his touch and play the ball forward. He can play it around the outside to the on-rushing Son. The issue is that Son's obviously lost that yard of pace that he once had. Kwanzaa could come across, or Endo later on, and try and track him. Or, with that space being created now, either side of Van Dijk, he could play it to Solanke, whose movement, whether that's dropping in to receive it with his back to goal in deeper areas, hold off Van Dijk, and those two had a really good physical confrontation throughout the game, turn and then play it to the likes of Johnson at right wing to get him behind, or to Son, or to maybe one of the on-rushing eights who would look to penetrate with attacking runs through the half spaces. Or, as I just said, go over the top, receive it from deep, break the press and create from there, or get a goal scoring opportunity of his own, which he did in the second half. One was a disallowed goal, the other he set up Bergvall to make that an all-important win for Spurs. And so I think that ability for Spurs to do that is very underappreciated and very underrated. But it wouldn't just be through the direct option. Again, they're a multifaceted team where they could play out. It would be with, let's say, Conor Bradley coming up here, Kwanzaa shutting up the position to Son. You then get Kulusevski coming from this further up area, dropping in a little bit deeper to potentially receive the short option, moving off of Gravenberch, who would have to react to his positioning. And then you'd get Basuma coming over, who could, again, stay deep if Kulusevski hasn't made that movement, or move a little bit further on to receive the ball from Jed Spence, ride the challenge of Curtis Jones to turn inside and then get playing, and use his technical quality to resist the press and produce a really good pass to get him forward. And whether that is to Solanke, who could be making the run off of Van Dijk, whether that is the long pass over to Brennan Johnson on the far side, or whether that's because maybe McAllister's come across to try and close down Basuma, or a marker's come free, someone's been caught out of position, maybe the pass to Bergvall running off into space in the midfield. There's plenty of ways where, space could be formed from this position from a Spurs perspective, but it comes from Basuma's intelligence and his quality to fashion chances. And as well, if Son even maybe pulled in a little bit deeper to receive the pass, Kulusevski would then have to make an aggressive run from these deeper areas. And with slick one-touch passing play, it could then lead to any one of these players, let's say Basuma, to get into a position where he can play that ball over the top for Kulusevski. And if the timing was right, which it often wasn't, the Spurs were through and they could create. But again, multiple ways to just hit that defensive line for Liverpool as quickly and as efficiently as they can. To be fair to Jed Spence, he won his battle with Conor Bradley in an attacking sense and in a defensive sense. I thought he was excellent. Full credit to him. He's not a player that I particularly hold in such high esteem, but produced a brilliant performance in this game, and full credit to him. And there were two ways that Liverpool would prevent the attacks from Spurs and force them to break down. One would be through that long ball going over the top and Alisson being ready to sprint off of his line and clear the ball, as he's maybe one of the best sweeper keepers in the world. His timing and his decision making is second to none. He doesn't charge out like an Edison, where he's like a Wolverine on coke all the time to clear the ball and get it wrong because you're just so aggressive in your running. It's well timed. It's always at the right moment, and he never leaves himself exposed to get caught out. And it's just the sign of him being the best goalkeeper in the world, in my opinion. Or if, let's say, the ball did progress down the wide areas and they had crossing opportunities, again for the second game in a row where he's come in clutch for his team. Van Dijk being the player to prevent a ball going to anyone in the box with a bit of space was excellent, and his death stare to the rest of the team is phenomenal. It's the biggest. I'm not angry at you. I'm just disappointed, and even I felt it. I'm not a Liverpool fan. I'm not his son, but I just felt like getting into my room and just making sure I was holding the line and trying to push up with all my imaginary friends to maintain a really good defensive line. Cheers, Virgil. Cheers, captain. But anyway, there we go. That was Spurs' attacking phase, just suckering Liverpool into the press, trying to beat it through direct or slick passing and movement. And it worked, and they got their goal. We'll now go on to the Liverpool attacking phase. Let's see how that went on. Now, Liverpool would play up in a sort of 2-4-1-3 slash 2-3-2-3. That would all be dependent on McAllister's positioning. Sometimes you could take up the deeper pivot alongside Gravenberch, or you could move up into the 8 position, allowing Jones to fill in the right-sided 8 position. He's fantastic at both. I've spoken highly enough about McAllister enough on this channel. I think he's a top player. Excellent. Virgin on world class for me. I think he's an astonishingly good player. Van Dijk, Kwanzaa as the centre-backs looking to receive from Maddison. Bradley and Tsimikas natural fullback positions, Jota up top, Gakpo wide left, and Salah typically coming in a little bit more narrow for reasons we'll explain in a minute. Spurs, as they do under Ange, mate, press high, 4-1-4-1, as they normally do, and it would generally be with Solanke shadowing the run from Van Dijk inwards, so he would go to Alisson, who could then look to play it to Kwanzaa / Endo, and Solanke would go over to press and make sure he was stopping that pass from going into Van Dijk, because as we know, Van Dijk is a lead creator for Liverpool with his direct passing from deep, and Solanke did a fantastic job of making sure Van Dijk didn't get that luxury to do so. And I have to say, Solanke's pressing is unbelievable. Quick, aggressive, non-stop, tons of energy. It's a great quality to have, I think, in a side like Spurs. Son would drop in on Bradley, Kulusevski, Gravenberch, Bergvall on McAllister, and Johnson sticking closer to Tsimikas. And where Liverpool could get a bit of joy playing out was when players made jumps to the spare centre-back. And so I'll go over it a little bit phase by phase. The one place that Liverpool didn't have an amazing amount of joy from building up was the right-hand side, because let's just say if the ball went to Kwanzaa, Son would come up to press him from Bradley in the pass to Bradley became free. Jed Spence was aggressive, starting position great. He was quick getting closer to Bradley and preventing him from playing out. And as I said, it was a brilliant game off the ball and it was a brilliant game on the ball. He really had the number of Bradley, fullback to fullback, man to man, kitten to kitten. Did fantastically, and Bradley couldn't really turn and play, be forced backwards or forced into giveaways, knocking it long or whatever. And as I say, just couldn't really play out from that side, and it didn't affect the back three as much because of Salah's more narrow positioning. Gray didn't necessarily have to move over because he was already in a bit more of a comfortable position for him. So that was one way that Liverpool would attempt to play out. It didn't work as well. Another one would be if it went through the left-hand side. So let's just say if Kwanzaa could play to Alisson or play to Van Dijk, and he could have a bit of time to turn and play forward, and Brennan Johnson came to commit. And a little bit on Alisson, by the way, I thought, bar one moment that could have cost Liverpool a goal, I thought his ability to play out under pressure and be composed enough on the ball to play forward and help overload that Spurs press was excellent. Again, one moment where it really cocked up, but that's just going to happen. That's one of those things you have to accept. But he generally doesn't make mistakes. And bar that, I thought Alisson was excellent, especially first half. Van Dijk could then play to Tsimikas, and for some reason on the right-hand side, and whether that's because of Gakpo's wide positioning that caused issues for Porro, whereas Spence maybe felt like he could leave Salah because he was more narrow, Porro wasn't willing to come up and engage with Tsimikas. If he could look and play forward and drive with the ball forward, Porro would drop off. He'd have a lot of space to work into. Maybe that would then lead to perhaps Bergvall coming over, and Basuma and Kulusevski would have to come across and try and get close to him, prevent him from playing out. Maybe Johnson would have to work back. You'd also sometimes get Jota dropping in to help try and overload and prevent an option for Liverpool to play out to, which again I think facilitates why Salah was a lot more centrally positioned than he normally is, because Jota dropping in meant that he sort of needed that striker forward threat to fill in when he wasn't there, and Jota more often than not would jump into press. He would try and join these central attacking areas. He could form almost a box midfield with McAllister, Jones and Gravenberch. Those are ways that did benefit Liverpool. They could play into the centre with that overload and then get a man free, sometimes McAllister or Gravenberch, to play forward to Gakpo. And the issue is, again with Porro, his positioning in terms of the distances between himself and Gakpo, I thought were really bad. Really, really bad. As soon as there was the threat of a pass going into him, he'd drop off so quick. It was almost as if he was so concerned about that space from behind. He didn't want to get beaten by it, that he'd leave so much space for himself and Gakpo, where Gakpo could still receive the ball to feet and then attack Porro one-on-one. And I can't really remember Porro ever winning that individual battle against him. Gakpo had time to drive at him, to then get Liverpool up the pitch to cause them to overload in the attack with the amount of numbers they do. Where he could get into wide left crossing and shooting positions, whether that's taking it into his right foot to try and bend it in the top corner. Didn't work, but we know he has that in his locker and it does work more often than not. Or play a crossing opportunity for Mo Salah to arrive in at the back post. Or McAllister making a late run from deep in his position to get on the end of any balls, which he's fantastic at. His off the ball movement is top draw from McAllister. His quality was a bit lacking, Gakpo, and he usually makes a lot better of the chances that he was presented with in this game. But he did have openings, he did have opportunities, and maybe on another day Spurs lose this game because of it. But poor from Porro, dropped off too easy, left too much space between himself and Gakpo. He was frightened of getting close to him one-on-one. So a really timid fullback performance, the complete opposite of what Jed Spence was on the far side. Or another way that Liverpool could play out, the last and final way, would be, let's just say in this position, if I just sort this out a little bit, and it would come from McAllister, who could move up into the attacking midfield position with Jones, presenting Gravenberch as the single pivot. This would then force Bergval back, and he would form a line with Basuma, so it would leave Kulusevski on Gravenberch. And again, let's just say if Solanke found himself over to Kwanzaa and the ball went to Van Dijk, Kulusevski would then move from Gravenberch to Van Dijk. But with that, created a lot of space in that central area for Gravenberch to receive the ball. Van Dijk could play it to him, he could turn, which he's fantastic at, and again, stick to those same attacking qualities and find the pass into maybe Mo Salah, who was really poor in that first half. His central positioning really cut off any chance to play the ball to him. Wasn't making the correct movements. He just wasn't involved in the game at all. Jed Spence kept him out the game really well. Second half, he got a little bit better. He was able to pull off a little bit wider and find some space as Spurs started dropping off a bit. But again, nowhere near good enough for a player of his quality. Jota could then drop in to overload these areas to allow Gravenberch to play through him and again cause issues for the midfield too, because in Archie Gray and Radu Dragozin, they weren't as keen on breaking from the defensive line to engage with him. He was left on the ball quite a lot and left to overload those central areas. And then as it allowed Conor Bradley to get forward, maybe making an inverted run in between Salah and the central players from Tsimikas as well, Liverpool had direct attackers to get forward. But Spurs dropped into shape really well when they did. They were very well disciplined in their off-the-ball shape and formation and defended it excellently. And when they needed to defend deep, they did it well. And Liverpool just lacked that spark. It got a little bit better when Trent Alexander-Arnold and Nunes and that came on. They had a bit more of a threat, but maybe a little bit too little too late, and it allowed Spurs to sit back and then use their direct options to hurt Liverpool and take a really important 1-0 lead into Anfield in a month's time, which, by the way, feels mental how there's so much time in between first leg and second leg, but what do I know? But I'd love to know what you guys think. Like the video if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it, comment down below, tell me why either way, and subscribe if you want to see more. In a bit, lads.